What happens when a country underestimates the value of people who quietly carry its hospitals, homes, schools, and industries on their backs? What happens when leaders assume loyalty can be replaced, skill can be copied, and dedication can be imported overnight? Many countries tried this experiment. Many countries failed. Across the world, Filipino workers have become the invisible engine behind daily life. They show up early, stay late, adapt quickly, and serve with heart. Yet time and again, some governments believed they could do without them. The result was never what they expected. This is not just about labor. This is about systems collapsing when the heart is removed. Today, let's talk about countries that pushed Filipinos away and the painful lessons they learned afterward. But before we go deeper into this story, we want to hear from you. These stories reach far beyond one nation and they touch lives across the world. So tell us, where are you watching from today? Drop your city and country in the comments and let's see how global this conversation truly is. If this story speaks to you, support the channel by liking this video and subscribing to Global News Frontier. Together, we bring real stories to light. Stories that connect nations, workers, and lives across borders. Saudi Arabia. When healthcare began to crumble for years, Saudi Arabia's hospitals ran smoothly, not by accident, but because of Filipino nurses, caregivers, and medical professionals. They staffed wards, cared for the elderly, comforted families, and kept healthcare running even under pressure. Then came a turning point. In the early 2010s, new restrictions on foreign workers were introduced. Thousands of Filipinos were forced to leave. Officials believed local replacements would fill the gap easily. They were wrong. Almost immediately, hospitals felt the shock. Nurse shortages became severe. Patient care slowed. Waiting times increased. The level of compassion and efficiency people were used to began to disappear. Families complained. Doctors struggled. Entire facilities operated understaffed. Healthcare is not something you can learn on the job overnight, and dedication cannot be manufactured. Eventually, Saudi Arabia faced reality. The system was breaking. There was only one solution: bring Filipino medical workers back. Today, Filipino nurses and caregivers once again form the backbone of Saudi healthcare. The lesson was clear and expensive. Removing Filipinos nearly cost the country its medical stability. Kuwait. A ban that hurt everyone. In 2018, diplomatic tensions exploded after disturbing reports of abuse against Filipino workers. The Philippines responded by halting deployment, and Kuwait followed by blocking new Filipino arrivals. On paper, it looked firm. In practice, it was disastrous. Homes suddenly lacked trusted domestic helpers. Hospitals scrambled to fill nursing roles. Construction projects slowed because skilled hands were missing. Families searched for replacements but found inconsistency, higher costs, and lower reliability. The truth became unavoidable. Filipino workers were not just one option, they were the standard. By 2020, frustration boiled over. Employers, businesses, and ordinary families pushed back hard. Kuwait had to negotiate. A new labor agreement was signed, protections were improved, and Filipino workers were welcomed back. The ban didn't punish Filipinos. It exposed how deeply Kuwait depended on them. A pattern the world keeps repeating. These stories are not isolated. They follow the same pattern. A country relies heavily on Filipino workers. Leaders assume they can replace them easily. Filipinos are pushed out. Systems weaken or fail. The country quietly invites them back. This cycle reveals a truth many don't like to admit. Filipino workers don't just fill jobs, they hold systems together. They bring skill, patience, adaptability, and something harder to define: heart. Filipinos are often described as resilient, but that word hides the real story. Resilience was never meant to be exploited. Loyalty was never meant to be taken for granted. When countries push Filipinos away, they don't lose cheap labor. They lose stability. And every time, the world learns the same lesson again. You can replace numbers. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Kuwait learned the hard way that its economy and daily routines were quietly held together by Filipino workers. Once they were gone, the cracks appeared everywhere, and fixing them took far more effort than anyone expected. Then you look at Qatar, a country that sells perfection to the world. Luxury hotels, polished airports, premium airlines, everything designed to feel effortless. But effort doesn't disappear, it just moves behind the scenes. Filipino workers were the ones making that smooth experience possible. from hotel lobbies to airline cabins. When the regional diplomatic crisis hit in 2017, and many Filipinos were pushed out, officials believed the transition would be smooth. It wasn't. Service began to feel rushed. Delays became normal. Standards quietly slipped. Visitors noticed, and when visitors notice, reputation suffers. What stands out to me here is how fragile world-class really is. Remove the people who uphold it, and the image fades fast. By 2019, Qatar adjusted its approach. Salaries improved, benefits were added, Filipino workers were welcomed back. And almost immediately the service culture recovered. That alone tells you how irreplaceable those skills really are. Now think about the United Arab Emirates, a country known for building fast and dreaming big. Towers rising from the desert, massive malls, non-stop tourism. But progress like that doesn't happen on its own. It's built by hands, and many of those hands belong to Filipinos. During the 2020 pandemic, thousands of work permits were suspended. Filipinos had to leave, and there was confidence that locals could cover the gap. Instead, the opposite happened. Construction slowed or stopped. Hotels struggled to stay fully staffed. Hospitals lost experienced nurses right when healthcare mattered most. Tourism dropped and momentum disappeared. What's striking is how quickly growth stalled once skilled workers were removed. By 2022, the UAE changed direction. Higher wages, better conditions, active recruitment. Today, the country openly relies on Filipino workers again because without them, progress simply doesn't move at the same speed. Malaysia followed a similar road. There was a time when Malaysia's service sector ran smoothly. Hotels, restaurants, retail spaces all benefiting from Filipino professionalism. But in 2016, stricter labor rules forced many to leave. The belief was that replacements would step in easily. That belief didn't last long. Hotels became overwhelmed. Restaurants struggled during busy hours. Customer service declined, and complaints rose from both locals and tourists. What I notice here is that service quality isn't just about staffing. It's about consistency. Once that disappears, trust disappears with it. By 2019, businesses pushed back hard. Malaysia reopened its doors, improved pay and conditions, and Filipinos returned. Today, the service industry is thriving again, quietly proving where the real strength lies. Japan's situation feels more personal. Japan has one of the oldest populations on Earth. Elderly care isn't optional, it's essential. Filipino caregivers stepped into this role with patience, empathy, and professionalism. But when strict language and entry rules were introduced in 2010, many were blocked. The consequences were serious. Families struggled to find qualified caregivers. Nursing homes filled beyond capacity. Elderly people received less attention, less care, less dignity. And this is where policy meets reality. Compassion can't be replaced by rules. By 2018, Japan eased its restrictions. Filipino caregivers were welcomed back and balance slowly returned. It was a clear reminder that caring for seniors isn't just about systems, it's about human connection. Then there's Singapore. Singapore is built on efficiency in homes, hospitals, and daily life. Filipino workers played a huge role as domestic helpers and healthcare staff. But when borders closed during the 2020 pandemic, many couldn't return. The impact was immediate. Families struggled. Children and elderly people went without trusted care. Homes felt the strain. And what stands out to me is this. When reliable help disappears, even the most organized society feels vulnerable. When you step back and look at all these stories together, the message becomes clear. Filipinos are often treated as replaceable until they're gone. And once they are, systems don't collapse loudly. They weaken quietly. And that quiet struggle is what forces countries to rethink everything. Singapore felt the impact almost immediately. Hospitals were stretched thin. Families struggled at home. And the absence of trusted workers created stress in places people rarely talk about. By the end of 2021, the government shifted direction, moving quickly to reopen pathways for Filipino workers. Once they returned, balance followed. Today, they're once again woven into Singapore's daily life, quietly keeping things running as they always have. Then there's Hong Kong, and this one is especially telling. For generations, Filipino domestic helpers were the backbone of Hong Kong households. They cared for children, supported aging parents, and kept homes functioning in one of the world's busiest cities. In 2017, officials tried to reduce reliance on them, encouraging locals and other nationalities to fill the roles. It didn't go as planned. Families began to complain, not out of bias but out of experience. Skills were inconsistent, Trust was missing. Professionalism dropped. What stood out to me here is how quickly confidence disappeared when reliability did. By 2019, the policy was quietly rolled back. Today, Filipino helpers are in such high demand that families willingly pay more just to secure one. That alone speaks volumes. Trust has value and it can't be forced. South Korea learned a similar lesson, but in factories instead of homes. Behind South Korea's global reputation in technology, automobiles, and heavy manufacturing are skilled workers who keep production lines moving. Filipinos were a big part of that workforce. When visa restrictions tightened in the early 2010s, many left. The consequences were immediate. Production slowed. Output dropped. International competitiveness took a hit. What's striking here is how sensitive industrial systems are to labor disruptions. By 2016, South Korea reopened visas for Filipino workers, recognizing that efficiency and skill couldn't be replaced by policy alone. Italy's story cuts even deeper. With one of Europe's oldest populations, Italy depends heavily on caregivers. Filipino workers became the preferred choice because of their patience, empathy, and dedication. When immigration rules tightened in 2011, many left. What followed was quiet chaos. Families struggled to care for elderly relatives. Nursing homes filled beyond capacity. Seniors received less attention and dignity. This is where the cost of policy becomes human. By 2014, Italy reversed course, actively encouraging Filipinos to return. Today, Filipino caregivers once again dominate Italy's care sector. A reminder that compassion isn't something you can regulate. Canada's wake-up call came through hospitals. For decades, Filipino nurses supported Canada's healthcare system, but stricter immigration policies in the early 2000s blocked many from entering. By the middle of that decade, the damage was clear. Hospitals were understaffed, nurses were exhausted. Patients waited longer for care. By 2015, Canada had no choice but to change direction, fast-tracking Filipino nurses through immigration programs. Today, they form the backbone of healthcare across the country. It's another example of a system realizing too late how much it depended on people. It once slowed down. The United States faced the same reality, on a much larger scale. Filipino nurses have long been essential to American hospitals. When work visas were reduced in the early 2010s, officials assumed local staffing would be enough. It wasn't. Shortages grew, burnout spread, patient care suffered. By 2018, visa pathways reopened, and Filipino nurses returned in large numbers. Even now, hospitals across the U.S. rely heavily on them. The lesson was painful but clear. Healthcare collapses without experienced hands. Spain's experience tied everything together. With strong historical links to the Philippines, Spain once welcomed Filipino workers across hospitality, healthcare, and service industries. When visa restrictions tightened in the mid-2000s, hotels, restaurants, and hospitals began to struggle. By 2015, Spain reversed course, reopening its doors to Filipino workers. The recovery that followed showed exactly where the problem had been. When I look at all these countries side by side, one thing becomes undeniable. Filipino workers are treated as optional until systems start failing. Then suddenly, they're essential again. Not because of nationality, but because of consistency, skill, and heart. And that's the truth every one of these nations had to relearn. By the time Spain adjusted its approach, the message was already clear. Once Filipino workers returned, stability followed. Today, their contribution is openly acknowledged again, not as a favor, but as a necessity. Australia learned this lesson through pressure. In 2017, the country tightened its skilled worker visa system. Many Filipinos who would have filled critical roles were locked out. It didn't take long for the consequences to show. Hospitals struggled to find nurses. Construction timelines stretched endlessly. Hotels and restaurants felt understaffed and underprepared. What stands out to me here is how interconnected everything is. Remove workers in one area, and the ripple spreads everywhere. By 2020, Australia reopened pathways, easing restrictions and actively welcoming Filipino professionals back. Once they returned, momentum returned with them. Today, they are once again driving key parts of the Australian economy. New Zealand's experience came from the land itself. The country's farming and dairy industries rely heavily on consistent skilled labor. Filipino workers had been central to that system. When visa rules tightened in 2018, many were forced out, and farms felt the impact immediately. Crops went unharvested, dairy output dropped. Exports declined, and this part matters, and agriculture doesn't wait. miss a season and the damage lasts years. By 2021, New Zealand reversed course, urgently reopening its doors. Filipino workers returned, and the agricultural sector stabilized again. Today they remain essential to keeping farms productive and exports moving. When you step back and look at the full picture, from Saudi Arabia all the way to New Zealand, a single truth repeats itself across borders, cultures, and economies. Every one of these 15 nations believed at some point that Filipino workers could be replaced. Every one of them learned otherwise. When Filipinos were pushed out, systems weakened. Shortages appeared, standards dropped, quiet chaos followed. When they were welcomed back, industries recovered, stability returned, growth resumed. And that's because Filipinos aren't just filling vacancies, they're carrying responsibility. They bring skill, adaptability, patience, and a level of commitment that holds systems together. So when people ask, why are Filipinos in demand everywhere? The answer isn't complicated. It's because when they leave, things fall apart. And when they return, everything starts working again. That's not opinion, that's a global pattern.